Almanac of August, and we're pleased to have Bill Oberst reflecting on his relationship with Holy Cross Faith Memorial and anything else that he wants to talk about. I think, show us that Playbill CD and tell us what you remember about it.
Well, this is a CD of a film performance of The Cup of Trembling, which is a production about Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And Fran Reed did a version of this play here at Holy Cross some years ago. You'll have to tell me what year, because it's too far back for me to remember. Maybe 15 years ago, maybe 20, somewhere in the misty past.
Yeah, 20 years into the mist, I think.
I think so, yeah.
Tell us about doing that.
Well, Fran Reed put it together. Fran was, now you'll have to correct me, was she a member of this church? She was connected in some way.
Yeah, her husband, Father Manuel Reed, was part of the group that figured out how to pay off the huge debt that came from the Five Rivers and
That's right.
other scandals.
Manny, who was himself a priest.
Yes, yeah.
Yes.
And he encouraged people to come. I don't know if he ever joined.
Mm-hmm. So I know that Fran and Manny were a part of the life of the church, and so Fran invited some people that she'd been involved with in theater down at Swamp Fox Players in Georgetown to come and be a part of this, and I was one of them.
Okay, so that's where you met her, was at the Swamp Fox Players?
Yes, yeah, she had directed some things down there that I had been a part of. Fran was an interesting person, God rest her soul. She did amateur theater, but she ran it like a professional. I mean, she really wanted it to be right, and she drove everybody very hard to get it right, and particularly for this, because of the setting and the subject matter, she wanted it to be right.
Mm-hmm. Now, it was done here?
In the sanctuary.
And so that was in the chapel or in the?
No, in the main sanctuary.
In here, in this building. Okay, so that does begin to date it, which puts it into the 90s, doesn't it?
Oh no, it'd be later than that, 2005 or 6.
Yeah.
Does that seem about right?
That sounds about right, because I moved to Los Angeles in 2008, and this was prior to that, so sometime around then.
And if Father Tommy Tipton, the big guy, was the priest in charge, that would...
I only remember Fran, she was in charge.
Yeah.
I remember no priest. I remember Fran saying, "You people are either going to learn your lines and get this right, or I'm shutting it down." I remember her saying that multiple times. Well, I mean, because Bonhoeffer is so important to the life of the church and the life of faith, I knew nothing about him. But she wanted it to be perfect because many people don't know about Bonhoeffer, what he did. And Bonhoeffer represents this whole wrestling that the faith, church, from the time of Jesus have always done with pacifism. What do we do as people of faith when confronted with militarism, with war, with violence? What do we do? How do we reconcile the words of Jesus, the actions of Jesus, to the realities of conflict and human conflict? And Bonhoeffer did it in large part. I mean, he's by a long wrestling with his own conscience, but he went back to the Old Testament prophets. And there's a passage from Jeremiah that's in the play that always stuck with me. I'd never read it before. But seekest thou great things for thyself, seek them not. For behold, I shall pluck up the whole land. All that I have planted I shall pluck up, but I shall give thee thy life as a prize of war. And so what Bonhoeffer took from that to mean, speaking personally to him, was everything that you have will be stripped away from you. For now you'll have your life. So seek no great thing for yourself. I'll give you your life. That's all I'll give you. And you do this thing. And for him, this thing was opposing Hitler, which meant opposing the church.
Right.
For him, as a priest, it meant opposing the church in which he was ordained, and the people, the bishops, the people who were his superiors. So it would be as if an American priest said, I am opposing the actions of the American government. Mm-hmm. It was that strong. And I think we forget that sometime, what Bonhoeffer was doing and what the risks were for him personally and professionally.
Well, he did get killed over it, so it's...
He was a part of the plot to kill Hitler, the failed plot, the bombing, which Hitler thought was a sign from God that he was to live, that he was favored by God, because the briefcase in which the bomb was placed just by chance behind a heavy oaken, there was an oak table, and one of the legs was a very thick piece of oak straight across. Mm-hmm. And the bomb was placed on the other side. So had not that big, thick piece of oak wood been between Hitler and the bomb, he would have died. Mm-hmm. But he didn't. And he lost part of his hearing, and his arm was maimed for the rest of his life. But it's funny that Hitler believed that this was a confirmation that God had sent him and that he was favored by God.
Yeah.
While for Bonhoeffer and the people who wanted to kill him, they knew that what they were doing was God's will as well. God's will is a funny thing like that, isn't
it? It is. It is. Do you remember other people involved in the production? I know
that Robbie O'Donnell was involved. Robbie's late wife, Mary, was involved. Hank Stroop was involved. Mm-hmm. Inga Ebert was involved. You'll have to look at the playbill for the others. My memory fails me. But I remember all of us being up there on the altar area, and I believe Fran had some radio sounds from the 1940s playing there as well for portions of it. I remember some of the radio broadcasts, the German national anthem. She really created the atmosphere well. Mm-hmm. It was pretty striking at the end. Before Bonhoeffer is arrested, he's comforting some of the other people who have opposed Hitler and who are now headed to concentration camps. And so the whole front of the altar area was filled with people on their knees in various states of distress. And Bonhoeffer's ministering to him, and then you just hear this voice out of nowhere that tells him that it's time to go. And so he takes the gospel, the same, I believe, the same Bible that we use there now on the altar, and he holds it up. And I wasn't a member of the church then, and so I had no background in the Episcopal churches. That was something I had never seen. I thought it was an invention of Fran to hold the book up like this. Yeah. So Bonhoeffer holds the book up like this, and A Mighty Fortress is Our God plays as he walks slowly down the aisle, holding the book, the gospel, up ahead of him, heading to what would eventually be his death. It was very powerful.
Yeah. Talk a little about not being an Episcopalian and then becoming an Episcopalian.
Well, what attracted me to this church, of which I'm now a member, was its actual doing what Jesus said to do. I could pretty up the language, but that's what it comes down to. Mm-hmm. You know, Jesus didn't talk about robes. He didn't talk about decorations. He didn't talk about rings or hats or pretty buildings. He talked about clothing the naked, feeding the hungry, taking care of the sick. You know, this church actually does those things. Mm-hmm. We are embodied creatures. We're not spiritual beings yet, right? Mm-hmm. So we have to be fed. We have to be clothed. When babies cry, they have to be comforted. When people are sick, they need to be visited. And I don't care how much spiritual mumbo-jumbo you surround yourself with, if you're not actually doing that and helping these embodied creatures of God who supposedly are made in his image, if you're not doing that Jesus stuff, to me, you're not showing Jesus. So I was disenchanted from churches because of that. And out in Los Angeles, I attended a church, Hollywood Presbyterian, that did the actual stuff. And then when I came back here, I saw this church was still doing this stuff. And I remembered it from Fran introducing me to it. They were doing the stuff back then.
Mm-hmm.
So I started coming and have joined it.
Yeah. When Hugo struck, were you in L.A.?
89. No, I was here. In fact, when Hugo struck, I was the director of the Georgetown County Chamber of Commerce. So yeah, I remember that well.
And this church was involved in Hugo relief.
I believe so.
So,
I believe it was, yes. And I'm sure that if there was any opportunity to minister to people's real needs, as long as this church has existed, it's done it.
Mm-hmm. As I think I understand, that's basically the black heritage that was embodied in Erasmus Baskerville.
That's right.
And
when I was with the chamber, this was Camp Baskerville.
Right. Do you remember much about that?
I remember Tony Campbell being here. It was a very strong presence. Tony was involved in the community heavily, and Baskerville had a very strong reputation for service even back then.
Mm-hmm. Tell me a little more about LA and then tell me more about this place.
LA is 12 million people all trying to get to the same place at one time.
Uh-huh.
That's what it is every day.
Yes.
And so life here could not be more different.
Mm-hmm.
For me, LA was the office.
Mm-hmm.
And I did it for 12 years. And it was the office. And I did what I wanted to do for my career. And then having done that, I could relax a little bit. And so came back here to be closer to my family.
Okay.
But LA is not a non-spiritual place.
Right.
That's it's a cliche of that cities don't have spirituality. Of course they do. It's just that there are more people jammed together, so you get all kinds of people very, very close together. Mm-hmm. I did notice that Hollywood was the area that I lived in, and I would walk to church. It was just a couple blocks. That on Sunday mornings, Los Angeles people, at least in Hollywood, were a lot less wary of one another than at other times, and that was nice. Just like here. On Sunday morning, people generally speak to you and nod. You know, they'll let their guard down a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you found a home there in the Hollywood Presbyterian Church.
Yeah, Hollywood Press, absolutely. In fact, Will reminds me of my minister at Hollywood Press because he also would launch right into the sermon.
Uh-huh.
He would say, "Good morning, Hollywood Presbyterian. Good morning." And before we'd even finish, "Good morning," boom, he's gone. And Father Will does the same thing. He's like, boom, right into the sermon. But yeah, there was a tremendous ministry out there. Of course, homeless people sleeping right outside of the church, so it wasn't hidden at all. Food banks, yeah.
When, if this was probably 05, 06, the church was predominantly white, but aware of its black heritage. And I guess you saw that as the church whitened. Yeah, I guess you saw that happening.
You mean,
Well,
no, I wasn't involved in the church then.
Oh, okay.
Not until, I didn't join until this year, 2021.
Oh, okay.
So I'm a brand new member.
Yeah.
I've attended since 16, 17 when I started spending more time back here, but have just joined. I don't know what the audience skin color was for when we did the Cup of Trembling because I couldn't see them.
Right.
It was dark, so I could just hear them.
Was it a pretty good crowd?
Oh yeah, it was packed. I believe we did 2 or 3 performances. Fran always packed them in because people knew she would, do things right.
And the audience would be a lot more than this church, right?
Oh yeah, the audience was from the community, which is nice because it was a chance to, sort of minister and share this story.
Yeah. Did the Georgetown newspaper cover the play or?
Yeah. And in fact, that's how we could find out when it was, I'm sure, by going back through the archives of the Georgetown Times. They did a pretty big story on it, I believe.
Oh, good. We're working with the archivist in Georgetown Library, Julie, and last name?
Julie Warren.
Warren. And she had her hands physically on a bunch of the old Georgetown Times, and then they were taken back. But it's our most important print source.
Yes.
It's very hard to get hold of.
Yes.
It's a real treasure trove for historians.
Yes.
And sort of forbidden treasure too. What else your family grew up here?
My mother and father are from Washington, and when they married, they moved here. So yes, I was born and raised in Georgetown.
And then, was that a Georgetown High or Winya High or what was the name of the high school?
Winya.
Winya. Okay. In that building where the Coastal Eye Group is and.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
Our mascot was an alligator, predictably.
A good non-controversial mascot.
Yes, fierce, aggressive.
Yes.
No one has a butterfly for their mascot.
That's well put. That's well put. Did you get interested in theater while in high school?
Earlier than that, all I ever wanted to do
Oh.
was to entertain. It's all I ever wanted to do.
Uh-huh.
And people said you couldn't make a living at it, so I didn't have plans to make a living at it. I went to school for journalism.
Mm-hmm.
It's called J School, and they taught you how to be a newscaster because they figured you're not going to make any money as an actor, so you might as well, But I wasn't pretty enough to be a newscaster, so I just started acting anyway, and I did 12 years of stage.
Uh-huh.
And then went out to LA and did 12, 13 years film and television, and that's primarily what I still do is film and TV. Luckily, there's a place for non-pretty people in film and TV. As long as you can be scary.
Did you get to play some scary roles?
I play nothing but scary roles. Yes. I am the killer, the murderer. All of those things.
Uh-huh.
Which is very interesting because humans love archetypes.
Yes.
And in fact, Father Will preached about this very thing this morning.
With Gregory Peck's quote.
People love to look at another person and categorize them and then have their categorization proved correct. It's very satisfying to us as humans to say, I knew she was like that. I knew he was like that. And that's how I work. In a large part, that's what film and TV is. It's showing you faces that you will immediately recognize as this or that, and then confirming that you were right. This or that is exactly what it is. And then it makes you feel good about yourself because you're like, I knew I couldn't trust that guy. So, and interestingly, there are, when I started doing nothing but scary roles, I wonder why the heck is this happening because I don't feel scary. Mm-hmm. And so I did research, and there are actually markers that determine whether we trust or don't trust a face. They have to do with symmetry, distance of the eyes, shape of the eyes, almond shape versus round, the mouth, angularity of the face, and my face has almost every one of the markers that says, don't trust this. Serpent-like qualities. And my face says, don't trust this man. And so on film and television, you can get away with, you can be trusted in life because people see your whole body. Yeah, right. But on film and television, it's just this, nothing but this. Uh-huh. And so that's why depictions of Jesus interest me, because how is Jesus depicted? Always with all the markers that we would say, trust this man. But I think it would be much more interesting if Jesus actually appeared physically in life as someone who was slightly untrustworthy. I think that's much more interesting than to say that, of course I look at him and I know that he's wonderful and I could trust him. Would God always appear doe-eyed and Would God, if we could see the face of God, would it make us say, oh? Right? I wonder. I don't know.
That's fascinating. We, so far as I know, have almost no clue what Jesus actually looked like. We
could have been short, fat, and bald.
Yeah.
In fact, Gore Vidal wrote a book in which he was short, fat, and bald and loved chocolate. And Vidal got excoriated for it.
Well,
because you can't depict Jesus as, a short, fat, bald guy scarfing chocolate. But he could have been.
Well, Gore Vidal is the right person to attempt most anything. I love all he does.
Jack, I'll say one thing. This has nothing to do with the cup of Timberlake, but since you asked about LA, also in my business, there's a stereotype that people in entertainment aren't interested in Jesus. That's not true at all. And I know this from having many hundreds. I've done over 200 film and TV projects. Many of them, late night conversations. People just talk about whatever they're interested in, and I'm fascinated by Jesus, always have been. And so I bring him up. And I've never once had a person say, I don't want to talk about Jesus. Mm-hmm. Quite the contrary. It's church people that they don't want to talk about. It's not Jesus. So I used to think, and I still think somewhat facetiously, but not entirely facetiously, that if it weren't for Christians, everybody would follow Jesus.
Yes. Yeah.
Because Jesus himself, he attracts, he pulls. But a lot of times what we do is we repel. We push away. But Jesus always pulls.
Yeah.
And I guess it is related to this because the story of Bonhoeffer pulls people in.
It does.
Because it ties together faith, Jesus, and the realities of what we have to live with in this world. And the choices that Bonhoeffer made are also the choice that we could make in a lesser sense. We don't have a Hitler, but we certainly face things in our life that we have to decide, will I accept this or will I oppose it in the name of Jesus?
You said something about Gore Vidal, and when they were trying to put the Hebrew Bible into something most Jews could read in the diaspora, they had I always pronounce it wrong, Septuagint, and which just means 70, and the number of people that may have worked on it. And as they were doing this, we are told by E.P. Sanders, a scholar, that they decided Jesus must have been ugly because in the Greek tradition he wouldn't kill a beautiful person.
It's very interesting.
And it is, and it tells a lot about all things everywhere.
It's very interesting.
Mm-hmm. And that you triggered that when you said about being short, fat, and bald, and eating chocolate. We also think that Jesus said, just because you're not with me doesn't mean you're against me, or something to that effect, which may have come from Cicero, but Jesus may have said it. And that sure sounds like what you're describing. All these people talking about Jesus.
There's always a route for people to come to him if you keep him front and center. But if you keep us front and center, they ain't coming.
Yeah.
Because there's always going to be some obstacle. If you are trying to get people to say, come through me, come through my particular way of experiencing Jesus, and I will show you the way, there'll be some point at which they'll stumble and they'll say, well, that doesn't comport with who I am. But if you just keep Jesus up, if I be lifted up, I'll draw all men to me. But it's really hard to do because we get caught up in our own particular views of Jesus. I have mine and our ways of worship.
Yeah.
So, but a story like Bonhoeffer's has the ability to cut through that. And that's why I think the production was important.
I think so. I'm sorry I wasn't here.
There's a part in this play in which Bonhoeffer is speaking to a Nazi who is interrogating him. And of course I say Nazi because I'm putting him in a category, in a group. But actually, they were both German citizens. They were citizens of the same country. They had known each other beforehand, but now one was the priest and one was the opposition figure. And Bonhoeffer says, he's asking him to recant. And he says, I am a Christian. Do you even understand what that means? But of course it's rhetorical, because the man had been one of his parishioners. He knew exactly what being a Christian means. So it was very interesting to see that and to play that dynamic out, because the actor who was opposite me when Bonhoeffer says this did exactly what I think was the right thing to do, which is just, he was silent. Because if your parish priest says to you, do you even understand what being a Christian is like? You really can't say anything in response.
Yeah, it's a perfect time for silence, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Better than mumbling out, I'm doing my job or something.
Yes.
Probably what he's thinking, but not what the priest had taught.
Now, an interesting question, would Bonhoeffer, the theology of Bonhoeffer, be welcome today? Would we accept it? I don't know. It's a very hard theology.
It is.
Because Bonhoeffer puts Jesus first, the teachings of Jesus first. He's very, very Christ-centric. And again, that gets back to what I started with, which is a good place to end, which is the discussion of pacifism in the church. How far do you go? How far do you go in embracing a war? How far do you go in opposing a war? And what is your attitude as a Christian, as a follower of Jesus, toward war itself? Right. It's a great conundrum.
It is. And we've got a group that been reading Bonhoeffer and have now exhausted.
You should have done this interview. You know more about him than me.
No. I realize how incredibly much I do not know. But his God's son is a great historian. Has written a book about this thing that Father Ryan has loaned to me, and it's making its way around the neck. And you may get it back, you may not. But Bethke shows just how complicated this life was for Bonhoeffer. Do you think we have Bonhoeffer moments now?
What's that again?
Bonhoeffer moments where God really has called us to do something that society doesn't want us to do?
Depends on what we hear. Depends on what we hear, when we hear it. When I was a kid, there were books called Jesus the CEO. And on the front he had a suit and tie, and it was about how his teachings were perfectly suited for business. And then I've seen Jesus the General, where he's wearing a general cap. You know, we love to take Jesus and dress him up with little paper doll cutouts and say, this is what he is. Yeah. But instead, what Bonhoeffer did was he held up Christ as this great mystery. You know, there's that great part of the Gospels where they say he's speaking to the disciples, and they think they understand what's going on. But then it says he set his face like a flint toward Jerusalem, and they were afraid. They were startled because suddenly this figure they thought they knew, they don't know anymore. And that was Bonhoeffer's Jesus, was sometimes a figure of darkness and mystery to us, not always a easily understood figure of light and joy and hope, but a challenging, sometimes dark figure that requires us to just grapple with a mystery that we can't understand.
Including killing Hitler.
Well, yeah, Bonhoeffer came to the place of believing that I must help take the life of another man, another human, and I'm sure that that's the right thing to do. That's a tough place to come to as a follower of Jesus.
It is. I've always thought we had to kill Hitler, but Bonhoeffer made me think through what had been a rather shallow acceptance, very uncomfortable thinking through.
One of my late night Los Angeles film set conversations was, would you kill baby Hitler? That's the kind of stuff that comes up at 3 a.m. But if you could go back in time and you knew what this person would become, would you kill him as a baby? Those people say, no, I'm not going to kill a baby. Would you kill him as a teenager? I don't think so. What about as a young adult when he's pretty close to gaining power, but he's not there yet? Would you kill him then? Maybe. And so it becomes nebulous. Like, at what point does a human become so toxic that you say, I have the right to take this life because it will serve the greater purpose?
Yeah, that's...
What would Jesus do?
That's the toughest question. Both that, what would Jesus do, and the way he just put it, is the toughest question I have encountered. I don't have a very good answer. I know what I would do, but I suspect it would not be what Jesus would do.
I suspect the same thing of me, so I'm really glad I've never had to make those kind of decisions.
Well, you've been very kind to talk with us. We may try to get you to talk again, because this is just fascinating. We enjoyed so when you did the Charles Dickens The Christmas Carol, and did that here for us, but you'd done it quite a number of times, hadn't you?
At Brook Green Gardens, I was very pleased to do Christmas Carol here because there's a lot of Jesus in there. Dickens put a lot of Jesus in there, and a lot of times it doesn't get brought out. The soliloquy of Marley's Ghost has always seemed to be something that children should learn in Sunday school. It's very Jesus. So it was a pleasure to do that, and I'm humbled sounds pretentious, but it's the right word, to be a part of a tiny part of the ministry of this church and to be able to support it, because of all the churches I've encountered in my life, this is the one that is doing the most for people in the name of Jesus. And I can't think of any place better to be spiritually, and it's a blessing to be a member. Thank you.
Well, thank you.